Today's khutbah is about something that we don't talk about usually. Usually we talk about its opposite. But both the opposite and the topic of today is something that the Prophet ﷺ practiced, and something that we ought to practice as well. We are living in a noisy world. The world is getting noisier and noisier. People talk all the time. Speakers. We value speech. We put a lot of value on speech. We go to workshops to study how to be eloquent and how to give a talk. Speakers today, they run at 150 words per minute. And those that are the excited ones, they can talk up to 180 words a minute. However, the Prophet ﷺ said in a famous hadith, and it's interesting that it's famous. He says, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhiri falyaqul khayran aw liyasmut." The Prophet ﷺ says, whoever believes in Allah and His Messenger, let them speak good, فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا, or else, otherwise, فَلْيَصْمُتْ, or one should keep quiet. And we heard the ayah, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا, which emphasizes that when we speak and we tell true words. There is an emphasis on speech, and we put value on speech. But what value do we put on silence? Have you ever heard or met someone who doesn't have an opinion on something? It's very hard these days to meet someone who doesn't have an opinion on anything. And the idea of being silent or keeping quiet sounds foreign to us. Yet the Prophet ﷺ was described as كَانَ صَمْتُهُ أَكْثَرَ مِنْ كَلَامِهِ. He used to be more silent than when he speaks, more than he speaks. And when he speaks, the way they described his words is that you could count, if you wish, you could count his words. Most hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ are half a line, except few that are long. 99% of the hadiths are very short. So you can count them, you can memorize them, you can practice them. They're easy. And the Prophet ﷺ warned us against two things, two organs, our tongues and our genitals. As we all know, this is not something new. The Prophet ﷺ says, "Min husni islami al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'nih." It's one of the beauty and the excellence of one's Islam is to leave aside that which does not concern them. Mind your own business. In the previous hadith, it's very interesting that the Prophet ﷺ linked Iman with فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. It's part of the excellence of one's Iman. one's Iman is perfect, if one's Iman is perfect, if one is serious about their Iman and wanted to perfect their Iman, فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. Let them speak good or لِيَصْمُتْ. Speaking good presupposes that we know what good is. Presupposes that we know that there is benefit in what we're going to say. So when we speak, we maximize the benefit and we minimize the harm. And if we don't, لِيَصْمُتْ. Let them be quiet. Keep quiet. And keeping quiet is not easy. It's very hard to keep quiet. If you ask somebody to keep quiet or to stay for even a short period without saying anything, they'd rather commit suicide than be quiet. The story goes that one student goes into a school and the principal told him, in our school, we value silence. So you're not allowed to say anything unless you are directed to say something. 3 months later, the principal called the student into his office and told him, you may say something, but you're only allowed 2 words. The school is a boarding school. And the student says, hard bed. He said, okay, we'll take care of this. 3 months later, the principal invited the student again into his office and told him, you may speak, but you're only allowed 2 words. And the student said, cold food. He can't even put a sentence. He's only allowed 2 words. The principal said, we'll take care of that. 3 months later, he invited the student at the end of the academic year and told him, you may speak. You're only allowed 2 words. The student said, I quit. And the principal said, you might as well. You've been complaining since the time you arrived here. Because language becomes a form of complaint. When we speak, is to nag or to complain about something. And we don't value the opposite of speech. We don't think enough about what we say. The Prophet ﷺ said that sometimes a person will say a word, لا يلقي لها بالا. They don't even pay attention to what they said. This word could elevate them in paradise. And the same word, if a different word, if لا يلقي لها بالا, could throw them in the hellfire. A word that we don't pay attention to. We don't think it's important. We don't think it's anything. Yet, it could take us to paradise. It could take us to hellfire. This khutbah is about silence. How to be quiet. Because only with quiet, by being quiet, we can discover ourselves. We can get close to ourselves. And herein lies a danger. When we're quiet, we are forced to deal with our own thoughts. And that can be very discomforting. We don't like to deal with our own thoughts. The Prophet ﷺ talked about that the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala لا يستقيم إيمان عبد حتى يستقيم قلبه ولا يستقيم قلبه حتى يستقيم لسانه. That the heart of the servant will not be straight, or the Iman of a person will not be excellent and straight unless their heart is straight. And the heart of a servant is not straight unless their tongue is straight. So sometimes we think one cannot have a nasty tongue or an abusive tongue and then say, my heart is pure and innocent. It doesn't work like this. Because written words represent spoken words, and spoken words represent our thoughts and the ideas that go through our head. And thoughts and ideas that go through our head are representative of the passions in our heart. So our words is a reflection of our heart. We can't have a nasty tongue and an abusive tongue and use abusive language and yet think or deceive ourselves that our heart is pure and innocent. The heart is reflected in our tongues. The question is, what kind of silence? What kind of silence? The Prophet ﷺ said, فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. This silence is connected, is linked with responsibility. And also with salvation, because it's linked with Iman. i.e., if there is risk, if one identifies risk in speaking, it's more prudent to remain silent. Muslims are usually risk averse, like doctors. Doctors are risk averse. Doctors are trained to save lives. So they don't want to take risk with the body of patients. Muslims are also risk averse. They don't want to take risks that may make them end somewhere where it's warm or too warm for them. But here the hadith is more also linked to responsibility, that there is a responsibility. When we speak good. When we remain silent, this is voluntary. We choose to remain silent. It's part of being responsible. Sometimes we experience silence. And we, as human beings, as Muslims, we need to identify what kind of silence we're in. Sometimes we encounter silence by what they call the act of silencing. You're being silenced. Or you happen to find yourself in a situation where someone is having using very abusive language and speaking for a long time and dominating everything, doesn't want anyone to speak. So as a result of that, you feel, I need to silence this guy. So this is usually associated with the use and abuse of power. Silencing. We need to identify what kind of silence we're in. Sometimes we experience silence when we go to a library. In a library, silence. In hospitals, silence. In mosques, churches, synagogues, people are expected to be quiet. In funerals, there's an awkward silence. People are busy with themselves, reflecting on the hereafter, or maybe they're not. It's just an awkward silence for them. That's a different silence. At the end, silence is a craft. Silence requires practice. Silence allows us to be attentive. We are distracted, distractions everywhere. If we don't start with practicing silence, we'll never be able to pay attention, because things are competing for our attention. And our words could take us to paradise or to the hellfire. Words include chatting and typing in your WhatsApp. فَلْيَقُلْ خَيْرًا أَوْ لِيَصْمُتْ. And then the third type of silence, the silence that we want. It's a silence that we choose on our own. It's a silence that is part of Sunnah. It's a silence that is the balancing act of speaking good. It's like we're speaking good if we remain silent. Instead of adding fuel to the fire, we remain silent. And that's a good act in itself. But also silence, as we keep on practicing it, becomes a spiritual act. You find peace in it. Sometimes we hear parents who have children and they say, the only moment of silence and peace I find is in the bathroom. These 3 or 4 minutes in the bathroom becomes a time for comfort for some parents. In the old days when we used to work in corporation, they used to tell us, for those who have families and kids, don't live near your work. Live a little bit far away, because you don't want to go from one fire to the next. Drive for half an hour and have some period of silence and peace before you get into the next fire. At the end, silence is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ advised Muaz that this is milakul amri kulli, that if you're able to guard your tongue, you are in control of everything. The Prophet asked one companion, can you control your tongue? And the companion said, if I cannot control my tongue, what can I control then? That companion was very smart. Think of a moment where you were silent. How did you feel at that moment? And if that moment was to happen again, how would you want to feel? And what kind of practice you want to have? I'll finish with this. If we start practicing, and this is not theory, this is something that can be done. Practice silence. 5 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, 1 minute a day, and enjoy that period.